We now move on to that area in which there is some controversy. When it comes to gifting the good deeds to the deceased, of the four madhabs, one of them has been consistent from its inception up until now. Two of them have kind of sort of flipped one way, and the last one has flipped the other way. The one madhab that has been pretty consistent throughout its inception is the Hanafi madhab. Any and all good deeds can be gifted to the deceased without any restrictions. As for the Shafi'i school and the Maliki, the Imams, both of them, began in one position, and then over the course of history, especially the Shafi'i madhab, the modern Shafi'i madhab has essentially completely gone against. And as for the Malikis, and out of the four madhabs, by the way, I must confess the Maliki madhab is the one I am the least familiar with in terms of development and whatnot. That's because geographically it occupies a region that is different than the other three, and I have better dealings with the books of the other three. Imam al-Shafi'i said, other than fulfilling the wajib, such as the guy didn't fast or whatnot, and sadaqah and dua and istighfar, four things, no deed benefits the dead and nothing reaches the dead. Imam al-Shafi'i is the most restrictive. And he explicitly says, nothing else can be done for the mayyit. And no deed reaches the mayyit other than this list that he gave over here. And then he quotes his evidences. وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. And إِذَا مَاتَ ابْنُ آدَمَ انْقَطَعَ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ ثَلَاثٍ. So he quotes two solid evidences. And he goes, khalas, deal with it. I've proven my case. Imam al-Nawawi, and Imam al-Nawawi is the greatest expounder of the Shafi'i madhab. Imam al-Nawawi says, the famous position of our school, and Imam he's a Shafi'i, the famous mashhur it's called, the one that is well known in our school, is reciting the Quran for the deceased does not reach the deceased. However, some group of our school said it does reach the deceased. And this is the position of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. The modern scholars of the Shafi'i school have given the fatwa that you may do good deeds and gift them to the deceased. And on top of this list is reciting the Quran. Is that clear? The same goes for the Malikis. However, to the best of my knowledge, the Maliki madhab still has two opinions in it. Imam Malik himself was on the same madhab as Shafi'i. No gifting. To the best of my knowledge, I have found both positions still in the Maliki school. Unlike the Shafi'i school, by the way, I have not found anybody. The Shafi'i school seems to have completely gone basically with the Hanafi madhab. The Hanbalis I say for the last, because they went the exact opposite. They went the exact opposite. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal was of the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal allowed good deeds to be gifted to the deceased. And this was the standard position of all Hanbali ulama without exception up until modern times. Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, who is the icon of the Hanbali madhabi, is to the Hanabila what Imam al-Nawawi is to the Shafi'is. And he writes, volume 2, page 225, any good deed that a person does and gives its thawab to a Muslim mayyit, two conditions, dead and Muslim. Okay? So the Hanabila, generally speaking, didn't really allow the gifting to the living. That's the Hanafis. The Hanabila want to gift it to the deceased. Some of them said that when the Quran is recited over the deceased and it is gifted, its thawab will go to the qari, and the mayyit will also be as if he has gotten the blessings. Some ulama said, if you recite the Quran over the mayyit doesn't get the reward of the recitation. The mayyit gets the barakah of the Quran. There's a difference between the two. So when I read Quran in my house, there's going to be barakah coming down. Right? And there's going to be a reward for me reciting the Quran. Two separate points. Some ulama said that when you read Quran for the deceased, what the deceased gets is the barakah and the sakina and not the reward. You understand? Very small. Ibn Qudama says no. He's refuting that point. That's not the case. Rather, the deceased gets the thawab. And then he says, and this is ijma' al-muslimin, the unanimous actions of the Muslims. فَإِنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ عَصْرٍ وَمِصْرٍ, in every era and in every land, they come together and they recite Quran and they give the thawab to their dead without anybody criticizing them. What do you think Ibn Taymiyyah, Shaykh al-Islam, said? And he's from the Hanbali school. Trick question or what? I'm asking you. Ibn Taymiyyah and his student Ibn al-Qayyim, who are of course some of the most well-known ulama in the history of Islam, and people that obviously, as you know, I admire immensely, and I consider myself to be a minor student of their thought, they are very, very explicit that all good deeds can be gifted to the deceased. And this is a shock to many people to find out, because those who claim to follow these two icons are on the exact opposite opinion. Ibn Taymiyyah writes, Majmu' Fatawa, volume 24, page 252. It is confirmed, يعني ثبت باليقين, something well known, that the Prophet ﷺ allowed giving charity for the deceased, and he allowed fasting for the deceased. And these evidences and others, the whole 9 categories I mentioned, are used by Imam Ahmad and Abu Hanifa to allow gifting other deeds like the salah and the qira'at al-Quran to the deceased. Basically, what is mentioned in the hadith is not a comprehensive list, it is an illustrative list. So anybody comes and says, I want to do this, the Prophet says, go ahead and do it. Anybody comes and says, I want to do hajj, I want to do sadaqah, I want to do fast, go ahead and do it. It's not a comprehensive list. It is illustrating examples. And from this, you get the principle. What is the principle? Any good deed can be gifted for the deceased. Ibn al-Qayyim, in his Kitab al-Ruh, it is the most detailed discussion back and forth that I have found of this issue. Out of all of these texts adding to one another, we can prove that the rewards of the good deeds reach the dead when a living person does it for him. So all of these ahadith, he mentions some of what I have done, and I mentioned more than that, but the point is all of these 9 genres, he mentions a good selection of them. Then he says, all of these put together prove a principle. It's something now thabit, something confirmed, that gifting the good deeds from the living to the dead is something that reaches the dead. And then he says, and even common sense and qiyas, even analogy, i.e. rationality, proves this point. It's not just the texts. It's also Islamic qiyas. One of the principles of Islamic extraction is qiyas, that this does this. Why? Because he said, the reward of the good deed, who owns it? The one who has done it. So the one who has done it has the right to gift it to whomever he chooses. Just like in this dunya, if I have some money, if I have some item, don't I have the right to gift it to anybody? It's my. وَأَمَّا قِرَاءَةُ الْقُرْآنِ وَإِهْدَاؤُهَا لَهُ تَطَوُّعًا بِغَيْرِ أُجْرَةٍ. As for reciting the Qur'an and gifting it to the deceased without paying, without the fees, we don't want the fees guy. We don't want somebody you pay the Qur'an to. We want somebody who wants to do it on his own. فَهَذَا يَصِلُ إِلَيْهِ كَمَا يَصِلُ ثَوَابُ الصَّوْمِ وَالْحَجِّ. This will reach the dead just like fasting and hajj reaches the dead as well. Now, if somebody were to say, but this fact was not known to the Salaf, and it is not narrated from any of them that they did this even though they were so eager to do good. Nor did the Prophet ﷺ explicitly command them to read the Qur'an for the dead, even though he commanded them to pray and for istighfar and sadaqah and hajj and sawm. So if the qira'ah of the Qur'an would reach the dead, he should have told them to do this. Now, here's the irony. He is taking on, essentially, the Shafi'i school right now, when he's writing the book. The Shafi'i school has abandoned this position. Who has adopted it? The later modified version 3.2 Hanbalis. Okay. That strand is essentially almost unanimous that we don't do this. Ironically, and this is so beautiful if you read this, Ibn al-Qayyim, it is as if he is quoting his own later school and refuting them point by point. And his own school will not accept what one of their icons is saying. We say, I'm going to summarize this because it's 2 pages of back and forth, and he's basically saying, this person is one of 2 categories. The first of them is that he is saying that Hajj and Siyam and Dua and Istighfar reach the deceased, but not Qira'at al-Quran. So we say to this person, what is the difference between reading Quran and between all of these other good deeds? What is the difference between them? Do you have an evidence to separate this good deed from the other list over there? These ahadith prove the general rule. You are coming and trying to find some exceptions. The same person who told you Hajj and Sadaqah and Quran, and in fact, any question that the Prophet was asked about this, he allowed. Then you come and you bring an exception. Where is your evidence for separating? There's no evidence. And as for the claim that the Salaf, and then the second category, those who say that these things don't reach the deceased, and this is not the Shafi'i school, this is actually the Mu'tazila, by the way. I did not mention, or actually I did, I think very briefly I said last class, the Mu'tazila, they said nothing benefits the deceased. And this is for them, and Imam Ibn al-Qayyim says, as for them, we say all of the evidences disprove this point. Then he says, as for the reason why the Salaf, it has not been mentioned from them, he brings a number of points. First and foremost, that they would do things in private, they didn't publicize these things. Secondly, that the Prophet ﷺ, he himself was not the one who told them to fast and give sadaqah and hajj and don't do Quran. Rather, these were questions posed to him. And anybody who came and asked him, he allowed it to do. And therefore, theoretically, what he's trying to argue, if somebody had asked him Qira'at al-Quran, he would have explicitly allowed it as well. And then he says, how can anybody disprove that any of the Salaf did this? It is an unknown whether they did it or not. The verse does not negate. وَأَلَّيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. You only have the right on Judgment Day for what you have done. That is your haqq. Can you demand the haqq of another person's good deeds? No. But what if that person voluntarily gifts you? The verse does not negate that. The verse allows this to happen. And he says as well, when the son of Adam dies, this hadith also the same thing can be applied here. His deeds finish. And it's true. It doesn't say somebody else's deeds cannot be gifted to him. Very clear here. Yes, of course, your deeds finish. But there's no negation of benefit from other sources. There's nothing of the sort. And therefore, it is very clear that Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah are upon the standard Hanbali madhab and the position of Ahmad ibn Hanbal himself, and it is also the Hanafi position, and it is the modern Shafi'i position, and it is many of the modern Maliki scholars as well. In any case, to give you some examples, the Lajna Da'ima of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Senior Committee of Ulama, in its fatwa dated 2232, they were asked about reciting the Quran for the deceased, and they said that there are 2 opinions on this issue, but the correct opinion is that it does not reach the deceased, and in fact, to recite the Quran over the deceased is a bid'ah. I say this with respect. Do not read into my statements as anything of disrespect. These are ulama that I studied with. I still respect them to this day, even if I disagree with their positions. That is their version of Islam, and I know they were sincere. I have no doubt about it that they were sincere, but that is an opinion, and we respect that opinion. And they are not the first to say it. Even though, to be brutally honest, to say that it is a bid'ah is a bit harsh. The classical scholars was give and take. And by the way, this is one fundamental difference. Imam Shafi'i and Imam Abu Hanifa, they didn't make tabdi' of one another. And I have no problem. You want to say that reciting the Quran is not allowed? This is what Imam Shafi'i said. Not Ahmad ibn Hanbal, by the way. Imam Shafi'i said, no problem. But don't make the other group mubtadi'. Have your position, defend it, and then tolerate a position that goes back to the tabi'un, tabi'un. We've talked about the issue of gifting, but do realize, when you gift your good deeds to the deceased, what you are doing is saying to Allah, "Oh Allah, I don't want this good deed anymore. Give it to somebody else." That's what Ibn Taymiyyah is pointing out. Don't make a mockery of this thing. You hope that Allah will give you for your generosity. Okay, final point. I discussed the issue of gifting good deeds. I did not discuss the specifics of what happens about Quran Khanis and coming together. I didn't even talk about that. That's a separate topic altogether. All of these additional trappings of on the 40th day, we're going to invite people on this and that. I didn't talk about that at all. So please don't read in that I'm allowing that or I'm speaking about that. Generally speaking, I am very cautious about that, and I think that the more things you add, the more problematic it becomes. So I'm definitely not endorsing those customs and habits. Is it good to specify a time and a tariqah and a method? I don't think so. But is it evil? I also don't think so. Again, we teach that if you're able to, don't do it in your families. This is what I say, honestly, don't do it. Do what our Prophet told us to do. If you want to do something, go for Hajj. You want to do something, build a well. This is far better than reading Quran, to be honest, because building a well is sadaqah jariyah. Reading Quran is a page or two.